going to be just a quick, not quick, but it's going to be an overview of how to recover with rubber cloth these feeder pneumatics. And in essence, the same thing will happen to the reservoir. These three units basically are restored the same way, so you can apply the same principles from one to the next to the next. So we'll start out with it nice and flat. Well, flatter. And so you can see Nacho has removed one of them already and just done the basics of getting it stripped clean. This one is obviously still completely intact. So the first step when you want to get your new cloth ready is to take your measurement for this opening and determine how wide of a strip that you want. So this, you've already measured it, and it came out to be about 120 millimeters.
25.
125 millimeters? Oh, okay. And so, was that before or after we added the overage?
After we added the...
Oh, okay. So before, this is measuring it, call it 120 millimeters. And you can see I can't pull it open any further than that, but it's still got wrinkles and stuff like that in the fabric. So what we usually do is we say, all right, we'll just add, 3 to 5, depending on how bad it is, millimeters to that 120 to account for that little bit that it can't open the rest of the way, so that we could try and maintain as much originality in the opening as possible. So we know that we want 125 millimeters. So then the next step would be to take our new cloth here and cut out a strip that is 125 millimeters wide. So my supplier for this will often write cotton on one side, just kind of indicating that this is the typical side that gets the glue. The cotton reacts really well with hide glue, hot hide glue, and makes a really good bond. And so we want to look for that side, typically. A lot of the times it's sort of easy to tell with this specific kind. They make tons of different kinds depending on what factory built it. But for this one specifically, the darker side kind of goes out because it's it's a cotton poly blend. The inside is just a cotton. So that's what's the best side to glue with.
And is it like linear like the other one, so you can take this?
This one is actually too thick to be able to rip. The weave is much thicker and the rubber layer is so much thicker. I haven't tried it. I've actually just assumed that it's too thick. I would recommend just cutting it for this one. So we'll cut that into a 125 millimeter strip. Now you had questions earlier about what this material here on the inside is. So this is sort of what we refer to as ribs inside of a bellows. So these act just like stiffeners for the cloth to help the cloth remember to fold that way, basically. Because when you get such big pieces like this, they don't want to bend, and so they just find the weakest point in the fabric to collapse on. And so having too many inappropriate or too tight of a bend can wear a cloth out faster than it normally would have. So what they do is they put these little stiffeners in to kind of train the cloth to make sure that it will collapse like this every time, to keep it, in shape, to keep these nice and puckered just like that, keep them going, so you're not just slopping all over the place. So that tells the rubber cloth that it should fold right here. The way it does that is that this cardboard is stiff, in these areas, so it's a lot harder for it to bend in the middle of this versus right here where there's that slit, and it allows it to articulate simply. And by doing that on both of these sides, you can see there used to be a set here on the side, and this is the corner. You can fold this cloth in once, and then since this, we have more cloth than what the pedal will ever pull. That's a side note that is important. this travel, if you do not know how wide this travel should be more than what the pedal can physically do. You should never allow the pedal to
Max it
stretch it tight or anything. It should be always slightly folded if the pedal is pushed all the way down. So that's a good way of finding it if you don't have it. But we know what it is. It's been designed and built that way, so we can just duplicate what's there. And so since it's not allowed to go taut anymore, it can't find a new way to collapse because there's these stiffeners that are telling it, hey, fold this way. It's not stretching out, so it's like, okay, we need to keep folding this way, and that's what keeps this fold consistent for the piano's successful career, basically. Now, it is typical for there to be 2 of these ribs in the front and a set on either side near the corner like you see here. That's because these pieces should be close to the action of the folding to try and influence it. The rest of the material here is just kind of along for the ride and will obey, where it's being influenced the most. It
So
will
there's
just follow.
three rib stiffeners on each.
So there are 4 sets total. So 2 on the front and then 2 on the sides. So we'll have a set
Oh, I
here,
see.
set here, and then a set on either side like that. Sometimes there will be manufacturers. This is a unique-ish design for this manufacturer, where they just do these little ones and then they have a piece of fabric that connects it. I've seen others that will make them, maybe like that long, and they will go the full distance. And the same for the front. They will just stop just shy of where this begins to fold, and they'll just do the whole front in one big piece. So it really just depends on the manufacturer. There is not a benefit that I've been able to detect from one style to the other. They all accomplish the same purpose. It's just helping the material fold the right way. One thing I do see that I don't think I like about this design specifically, this idea that they came up with, was that it actually seems to have created 2 pinch points right there in the front. And that's the great thing about being able to look at these old ones and see we have, 100 maybe years of wear being told to us right here. So you can see that those 2 points wore because that's where air was starting to seep through the fabric, and those line up directly with these strange pieces of cloth. I've never seen those on just plain stiffeners that have a split in the middle. So if I were to, say, recommend what you should replace it with, just put these ribs, these cardboard ribs in, and don't worry about this piece, because that seems to have created a pinch point in the system. So we get to be the...
Do the ribs just get glued to the...
Yes, yeah, so that's a great question. They do just get glued straight to the face of the cloth. When we glue them, you want to glue the rib, though. Put the glue on the rib and then apply the rib to the cloth, because we don't want any more glue on the cloth than is totally necessary, because that glue stiffens the cloth. So we only want the stiffening effect to be where we want the stiffening effect. So we don't want to just blanket brush, the whole piece and then stick the ribs on. Just apply the glue to the rib and then apply the rib to the cloth.
Is that cardboard anything special? Or?
It's not, no. It's just of a nominal thickness, something that's going to resist collapsing. Slightly thicker than notebook backing cardboard, just in that range, basically.
Where do you get it?
I get this stuff from the paper store in Provo, because they have a very wide selection of papers, cardstocks, in a wide range of thicknesses. So I'll actually take my calipers down there when I know I need a specific thickness, and I can measure their
So
paper
about,
supply and go,
What,
that's the one.
30,000s?
I would say, yeah, maybe about 30,000s would probably be plenty sufficient. Just enough to help to not be influenced, not bend so easily, but just to offer some support to those ribs. Okay, so that is sort of the overview of the ribs. So let's kind of get into some of this rebuilding process. So the first thing you want to do once you've stripped off all of this material is you want to inspect this canvas hinge here at the back for integrity. If the hinge no longer holds the 2 plates perfectly in line, you're going to have to rip it off and put a new hinge on, because you can't have this top plate, shifting and moving from the bottom plate, because that creates all sorts of stress on the rubber material. So you want to check that for any problems, issues, whatever it is. And then also you want to check the internal flap valve. These are called flap valves. They act the exact same as check valves, so you'll hear them kind of interchangeably. The reason it's just called a flap valve, super easy. It's just a flap that sits right over the surface of that valve. Its proper engineering name is a check valve because it is a one-way check valve. And so you want to make sure that this check valve is allowed to seal properly on this surface, because that is what creates the most efficient feeder. If there are leaks, you're pulling in air from outside as well as inside, and suddenly you've decreased the efficiency of the feeder instantly. So you want to be sure that that is properly sealing on both sides. So you want to check this internal flap valve and the external flap valve.
How do you ensure that they're sealing?
So the way that I typically like to do it is you can back pressure this system, again with a vacuum of some supply of some kind. So if you supply the suction to the trunk on the back of the feeders, so that it's the same trunk that these are actually supplying the suction to, if you supply the suction, you're pulling these flap valves down, and you can hear if there's any leakage happening around that area.
Do you have one motor that you use for the check on the deck and for the check on the flap valves?
Yes.
That you just always kind of use for all of your rebuilds?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Because it's the same amount of vacuum being applied, all the way across the board, the same pressure, so I can use that one vacuum for
Where can
everything.
I get one of those?
The player piano supply site actually has those motor conversion kits, that they can run off of electric motor instead. So it's a independently housed vacuum unit that is meant to be able to just be plumbed straight into these to replace the pedals.
I might have one.
And if you have a scrap one, if you've salvaged, parts like that, that's all I've ever done personally.
Is that what this is right here?
That is exactly that. Yes.
Okay.
Perfect.
We got one.
So a little bit of, if it needs any refurbishing, if it doesn't, great, whatever. That will supply all of your vacuum too, whatever you need. And it's nice because since that unit is specifically designed for player pianos, it's already at the right pressure, so you don't need to worry about regulating
So
it.
what does that box in the system do?
So that is basically a shop vac specifically designed to apply pressure into the player piano. It replaces the pedal function of the piano,
so it's
essentially.
More modern.
Yeah, it's a modern thing, so it takes away a little bit of the work for the user.
Don't kick your feet.
Yeah, you can turn the piano on and you can go sit in the chair and enjoy it instead of having to manually operate it.
So this is the outlet right here.
Yes, that's the outlet, and then that the
And this
nipple
is
on
the
the top
inlet.
is the inlet. Pulls the vacuum.
Let's try it.
So the
Yeah.
Shattuck has the feet pedal and that system. Is that pretty common?
It is, yeah.
Have both?
Because this unit was never... Nice, it works. This unit was never built because these player pianos predate the invention of the impeller vacuum.
Yeah.
So they're almost always just added as a subsequent thing if you don't want to play the piano. Oftentimes you'll find the feeders and the pedals inside, but they just put that unit inside to make it simpler and enjoyable from a distance. So that's an add-on you put into a piano, basically.
Oh.
Some of the later models after the invention of the impeller vacuum, they will come with that, and in absence of any kind of pedals. So you'll run across that sometimes.
The duo art that he's going to be working on. He's working on the Shattuck and the duo art. He's working on the
okay.
Striker Pneumatics.
Yeah.
You suggested that, so that one has.
I'm sorry.
both.
I said the Shattuck had it in it. I meant.
You're talking the duo art.
Oh, okay, yeah.
My
I was
bad.
like, I didn't know
Yeah.
the Shattuck had that, but no, that makes sense. Okay.
Okay. Yeah. So
Yeah, so the Duo Art has that
Okay.
that vacuum system, and it has both options because it does have the pedals
Yeah.
as well.
So just as a side note about the duo art, what I explained to Matthew is that is that we're hoping, fingers crossed, that
Yeah.
all of the loss of suction is from the striker pneumatics,
Yes.
and that we won't have to rebuild everything else.
Everything else.
Everything else.
Because this one's not a complete rebuild, it's just a can you get it working
Yeah, that's right.
sort of a thing.
And why did you theorize that it's just the striker pneumatics and it's not the feeders or the...
So oftentimes the striker pneumatics, they have the absolute thinnest material in the piano, and so that makes it really susceptible to being the thing that breaks and cracks and loses air
see.
first. And since there's 88 of them also
Yeah,
in the piano,
yeah.
that's all that leakage times 88 across the whole
Okay.
thing. So that is usually the biggest air loss in a piano, is when those start to
So
go.
essentially we're going to have to rebuild all the striker pneumatics, put everything back together,
Yeah.
test it, cross our fingers.
Cross your fingers and hope for the best.
There's no
If
way
you
to...
get 88 pieces out of the way from the start.
Yeah, those 88 components aren't part of the problem. But there is a way you can test those clear plastic valves. Same way that I was talking about testing these. You can apply the suction to see how well those seats are still working.
with that.
With that, yep. Because even then, even
Again,
one
by
step
listening?
better. By listening and testing. And that actually, in that system, that opens up the opportunity, because it is a closed unit and it only has nipple ports to allow air in and out of it. You can do the bubble jar, like I was telling you, where you run one hose down into the water and then you have a hose up here pulling. So if there is a leak, air will be allowed to travel through the water and you'll actually see bubbles. So that's a visual way of being able to tell how much is
Cool.
leaking. So those plastic units, since they have just nipple ports, they don't have giant gaping holes in wood.
Yeah.
You can test it with the bubble
Okay.
jar method. So
Interesting.
you don't actually have to put it
Got
all
it.
back together to test all of those.
Got it.
Yeah, that's great.
Okay.
And I can even just bring you my bubble jar because I've built one already. And I don't
And we can
I don't
rebuild
use
one.
it often.
So-
And you can build one too.
Yeah.
When I do troubleshoot that,
Mm-hmm.
do you test each striker individually before you even break the thing down?
No, I generally just, because in all of my experience, strikers have always been shot.
You just gotta do it.
You just got to do it. It's been something that even if I've thought this striker was doing really great, I would provide the suction and I'd try to open it and I'd feel it just creep right back open, like it just had no issue. I've almost absolutely never run into a striker pneumatic that doesn't need to be fixed.
So if we hooked that vacuum up to each of the striker pneumatics on the Duo Art, it would probably collapse, but then we'd be able to
You'd still be
pull it
pulling
open
vacuum, and you'd be able to pull on it, do all that sort of stuff.
relatively
I
easily.
saw even on that Duo Art, right in the, so you got the two plates that actuate, right there at the back, I saw a giant crack down the middle of all of those, just
Oh.
visually. So that's why I was like, start
That's
there,
it.
absolutely.
Okay. When there's a visual crack.
Yeah, there's a visual crack, you
there's-
absolutely know
Okay.
that's that's shot.
That makes sense.
Wait, was that on the striker stack? I
Yeah,
don't know what to call these things.
yeah. So what we
I've been calling it a triple stack.
a triple stack. Yeah, generally, if we're going for
Wendy's.
names, I typically call these decks.
Okay.
So you got deck 1, deck 2, deck 3, and then the striker pneumatics are just attached to the decks. So that's sort of the general lingo that I use when referring to them.
Okay. Sorry to
Oh no,
sidetracked.
that's fine.